I'm finally happy to be here. Up until now, I was like, but at any rate, I hope we have some fun with this today. The topic or the title of the talk is Jesus, the Groundhog, and the Light, the Feast of Flames. Like, what? But this is all about celebrating what's called a cross-quarter day. And we're going to explain all this. But I found a whole list of names for this very obscure holiday that happens in the dead of winter. Names like Imbolc, Candlemas, St. Bridget's Day, Carnival. There's references to all kinds of celebrations that happened at this time of year. And knowing me, you know that I'm going to have references. So if anybody wants to know where I got this information from, please let me know and I'll send you the references. There's a lot written about all this. And if any of you have heard me talk before, you know that I have a real fascination with history and that I tend to approach metaphysics as an applied science. I keep looking for the evidence of what's unseen, the evidence that points me to the fact that, well, we may not really be able to see it, but there's a trail that's been left towards that. And one of the questions that came up for this was, or a quote was, history is written by the victors. That's not exactly true. I found arguments against that, as well as that. I think it was Churchill used that quote. But the interesting part of that question is, if history is written by the victors, what gets lost? What gets left out? And one of the sources for my material was says that it's important to understand that nothing has been lost or created. And I really did find some evidence of that, because much of what we celebrate and have incorporated into our culture really rests on ancient things and beliefs and practices. So our story doesn't start here. It really goes way back to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, even before the establishment of Judaism and Christianity. So how does this relate to our 3 stops on the Flames of Faith and Groundhog's Day? Well, as I mentioned, it's related to so many other things. St. Valentine's Day, Carnival, Mardi Gras. It's just February is just one big happy festival, apparently, in the past. And it's all interwoven. So it really did reinforce for me the oneness. The more I looked at this, the more little tentacles and trails I found to other things that all led back to a common root. And I said, okay, there's oneness in here somewhere. Or, you know, it's just really, it was really being demonstrated. I also understand or sort of developed a better understanding of how and why, when we think about that demonstration of the one, how human beings kind of fixated on there has to be only one. Can't have somebody else's one, you have to have one. And that's a tale for another time. That's a really interesting question, but that's a whole other story. So maybe some other time. Now, the connections that I'm going to make are not exactly the exact order of the Flames of Faith, but it really flows between Judaism, Christianity, and the earth-based religions, or paganism. Because if you didn't ascribe to Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, you were considered a pagan, which means you either didn't have a religion or you had a polytheistic religion, not a monotheistic religion. So it's like, how could it be both? But at any rate, that was the definition. Now, I talked about this traditional Candlemas, and if you're probably saying, what the heck is Candlemas? Candlemas is the Christianized name for this holiday at the beginning of February. And we'll talk about more, but there's a whole interweaving between Judaism, Christianity, the earth-based religions, the Germans, Northern Europeans, and then all the way to Pennsylvania. So I hope you've got a lot of curiosity to take you along with this, and we're going to look at these links of traditional Candlemas to all those religions, and as well as tradition of light and fire, because this truly is considered the Feast of Flames. So our first stop, the Temple of Jerusalem, 40 days after the birth of Jesus. Now, we know that Jesus was presented to the temple, but why did that happen? Well, there were two reasons, and they're both part of Judaic law or Torah. Number one, it completed the purification of Mary after childbirth. Women were considered unclean for 40 days after childbirth. So they had to, there was some ritual, and they had to, do some things to verify their cleanliness. It also fulfilled the Jewish law that firstborn children, or firstborn sons, only the boys, sons, had to be redeemed at the temple. There had to be an exchange of money or something of value. Now, typically that would have been a lamb used for sacrifice. But if people were too poor to have a lamb, they could use something else. So it's written in the Bible that Mary and Joseph brought 2 turtle doves for sacrifice as payment for the redemption of Jesus. It also mentions that they brought candles. Interesting. Now, okay, so we've got this pretty routine Jewish ceremony that has to happen. It's codified in law. Why does this make any sense to the Christians? How did this become this big Christian celebration? Because it would seem that the work of Jesus as an adult would be more important to the Christians. But there's a little story here. So when Mary and Joseph get to the temple, there's 2 people there. Solomon, who was promised by God that he would not die without seeing the Messiah, and an old woman, Anna, the prophetess, who lived at the temple, and she also prophesied the importance of this child and the light. He would be a light to the Gentiles. So because of that, there were also some other biblical passages about fire being a representation of God. So there's a lot of mixture here between fire, candles, flames, Jesus Christ as the light, and that recognition with the prophets. There was a perpetual fire that was kept going at the Temple of Solomon that represented God. So there's a lot of connections between fire and the presence of God. And we have a couple more stops before we get the Gobbler's Knob, but I promise we're going to end up there. Now, let's fast forward several centuries, and we're going to get to the Roman Empire, when the state religion was the worship of their pantheon. And over time, there were all these rules, because God forbid some poor citizen would do something to offend the gods, and there would be havoc, invoked on the whole entire citizenry. So there were all these rules, and eventually that religion was outlawed. Up until then, Christians were murdered and martyred and tortured and everything else, because you weren't allowed to be Christian. You had to worship the right gods. Emperor Constantine really transferred the whole state religion from paganism, or their deities, to Christianity. And Rome became the seat of Christianity. It became the official state religion. Now, I keep emphasizing state religion because I recently came upon a quote that makes a lot of sense. Spirituality is a personal relationship with the divine. Religion is crowd control. And that sounds terrible, but when I really look back, that was how the tribe was kept together. That was what those rules and that overarching codification of behavior really helped to protect the tribe and keep life going. So again, there's ancient roots into why that happens. It's gotten a little out of hand, but there are some there was a rationale for it. So, all right, we're going to get to the Celts. In 580 AD, Pope Gregory was Bishop of Rome, meaning he was the Pope, and he decided to re-energize the missionary work, to evangelize and convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. So he appoints the guy who became Saint Augustine as the first Bishop of Canterbury. You know, the figure that crowns the kings and queens of England. You know, big deal person. So he sends Saint Augustine up there, and he gives them these instructions: do not destroy any of the temples and the shrines of the pagans. Reconsecrate them, because then you will have people coming back and worshiping in the same places as they did before. So we're just going to sort of change the decor and the painting and the, you know, and the designation, but keep the same places. And what really happened, in addition to that was monumental instruction. What happened along with that is they just co-opted all those gods. You know, when they went to celebrate the goddess Brigid, the goddess of fire in Ireland, they just eventually started celebrating Saint Brigid of Kildare, and it just all kind of, there's countless deities, pagan deities, who were renamed and sort of given a new role as good Catholic saints. So those ancient practices that the pagan Anglo-Saxons celebrated were pretty important at Candlemas. There is actually archaeological evidence that goes back to Crete about the Virgin Mary of the Bear. They looked at animals. Bears are fierce protectors of their young, and it was sort of translated to what is going to fiercely protect the tribe. So think about living in the old Stone Age at February. It's midwinter. It's freezing cold. There's not a lot of food. There's not a lot of warmth. People start looking around for, like, what's going to happen? We just ate the last of our supplies. What are we going to do? And the shaman tells them, I have measured the darkness. I have counted the days from the longest night. The light is increasing. The darkness is decreasing. We're going to be okay. We're going to survive. We're getting there. Because they looked at the wheel of the year. If you look at the circle and you divide it in half, solstices, and then the equinoxes, you've got 4 quarters. So Candlemas, February 2nd, is the cross-quarter day that marks the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. And so it was, again, we're tracing the movement of the light because that's what life depended on. So there are cross-quarter days all through, but we won't talk about them now. But back to the Celts. So all of this is informing what the Celts did and how this became Candlemas. So the major celebration in February, on February 2nd, was St. Brigid's Day. Brigid was the goddess of fire, the goddess of healing. She was a blacksmith. I think that was connected with the fire. And the name of this day was Imbolg, meaning in the belly, because the sheep would have their lambs. It was lambing season, and they would produce ewe's milk. So that was a source of food. It wasn't just used to feed the humans and the baby lambs. It was also used as a gift to the gods. So she was the great mother goddess. And interestingly, we're going to take a little segue back to Greece. At this time of year, Greeks also celebrated the Eleusinian mysteries. I don't know if I said that right, but the Eleusinian mysteries, where Persephone came back from the dead, living in the land of the dead, because nothing would grow without her. When she was in Hades, nothing was happening on Earth, so people were going to starve. So Persephone had to come back to Earth at this time of year so that plants would grow again. The threads keep traveling between cultures. So this celebration of Imbolc was a fire festival. As I said, Bridget was the goddess of fire, fertility, healing, prosperity. She was a warrior. Her name, Bridget, even means fiery arrow, the bright one. So that was just co-opted into Candlemas. So we're going to celebrate with more fire and flames. Now, another thing that people looked at those periods of time to tell them, which way are we going here? Are we going to die? The light's never going to come back? Or how do we know? They looked at the habits of hibernating animals and looked to see, like, when did hibernation begin? All right, well, it starts when it gets cold. Now, when does it end? So when the animals started to sort of shake everything off and start poking their noses up out of the bear cave or the groundhog hole or the hedgehog hole, that was a sign that the light was increasing. So in Germany, the same celebration that became Candlemas was fixated more on the changes with the animals that were hibernating. So they looked at hedgehogs. By the time the Germans came over to Pennsylvania, there weren't, in the 1700s, there weren't that many hedgehogs. There were more groundhogs. So they co-opted the groundhog. But okay, we'll keep an eye on the groundhog. So that's how we started to celebrate Groundhog's Day in America. Again, it's all tied to the changes of the light that were so life preserving for in ancient times. And it's interesting how that habit or that belief system or that drive is still current. We're still driven by that. So maybe now we're not celebrating the Feast of Flames or Candlemas, we call it Groundhog's Day, but it's all about having that light in our life. And you could call that light Jesus. You can call that light, oh, great, Phil didn't see his shadow. The bottom line is, it's going to be 6 more weeks till spring anyway. It doesn't matter if he sees his shadow or not. But the important thing is, the animals are coming back to full activity. They're starting to wake up in those little holes. So how did the Christians continue this? So they took, as I said, they co-opted or repurposed. I'm trying to find more positive words for this. Repurposed the goddess Bridget to Saint Bridget, who founded an abbey. She was a wealthy woman in Ireland in 500 AD. I think she was born in 500 AD. She died in, I forget when. Maybe she died in 525. But she is the first woman to have a national holiday named after her in Ireland. They did that last year, and they did it to coincide with the 1500th anniversary of her death. And interestingly, with the connection with fire, when she died, there was a perpetual fire kept going at the abbey from 525 AD until 1220 AD. So that fire aspect never really goes away. So who says history is written by the victors? It makes you wonder, because if all this stuff is still continuing, we still have the vestiges of those earth-based religions, of the goddesses and the gods and the things that they valued and what they looked at, and their symbolic representations with fire. It's still in use today. We haven't lost it. So they haven't, completely, victors haven't completely rewritten history. So that should bring us, one more thing about Candlemas and the groundhog. There's actually a little song that was the British, ancient Britain put together about Candlemas. If Candlemas be fair and bright, all right, if Candlemas be fair and bright, come winter, have another flight. If Candlemas bring clouds and rain, go winter and not come again. The Germans just substituted substituted the animals for the hedgehog. I mean the groundhog for the hedgehog. So, but it's still, there was always that weather connection with what happened to the weather on Candlemas and what that was going to mean. So back to that statement that nothing is created or lost. Interesting. I'm not sure what was created, and I'm not sure what was lost. Well, maybe we have the creation of a new holiday like Groundhog Day, but we haven't really lost anything. It still goes back to that. So there's a lot of commonalities, and it just tells me that what I realized is we're currently immersed in separation. Multiple tribal battles, even today, are raging all around us. And which one is going to be the right one is what basically we're fighting about. But as I looked at all this, what really came through for me was that golden thread that Holmes talks about that runs through all of these spiritual practices, all of these religions, that links us and draws the connections between all those individual candles on the flames of faith, linking us back to one. Thank you very much.